Stavros Lambrinidis is here. He is the foreign minister of Greece. On Wednesday night, European Union leaders agreed on a new package to control the debt crisis. It included a 50% write-down on Greek government bonds in return for further austerity measures. Not everybody in Greece is happy. Today, mass protests interrupted Ohi Day, which celebrates Greece's stand against Axis forces in World War II. Throughout the world, questions remain about whether the EU's new plan is a right long-term solution. I'm pleased to have the foreign minister here to talk about that and other issues having to do with Greece. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
You met with the Secretary of State.
Yes.
What was that about?
It was about discussing that deal that happened a few hours before I actually met her, in the very early hours of the morning European time.
Yes.
Because the U.S. has been quite involved, in fact, in this European debate. It is, after all, a world in which we're all interconnected and interrelated. And Europe's putting its house in order is something that the U.S. also cares about. And of course, we also talked about our region,
right.
You know, the Middle East, the Arab Spring, Turkey, the Balkans. So, you know, of course, I have to say, however, that although I'm a Greek foreign minister, no one particularly cares to talk about all those other things. They say, well, that's all very interesting. Now, tell me about the debt and the deficit.
What's going to happen to
exactly,
is Greece going to default on his debt or not?
Exactly,
that's the question.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think of the deal that has been struck?
I think it's an excellent deal. I think that there's work to be done to make it concrete. What I mean by this is that Greece was beyond any doubt now in the eyes of the markets and of the people of Europe safeguarded.
The markets reacted positively, but
indeed,
often they do
indeed.
After there's some solution
Yes.
in a thing that troubles them because of the potential.
Yes, and then there's usually just a spin that tends to focus on the negative.
Right,
but we'll see what happens in the next few days. I think we should discuss all this because it's quite interesting why you have this initial good reaction and the bad one.
Right.
But this deal is very good for Greece because it gives it the breathing space it needs. As you mentioned, there's this 50% cut in the bonds.
So-called haircut.
Haircut.
Right.
There are, however, also sweeteners for the banks that participate in it. So it's not as bad as it sounds, let me put it this way.
There's a guarantee.
There's a guarantee. There is an ability now of the European fund we've set up to buy bonds in the secondary market, not just for Greece, but for Italy, for Spain, for Ireland, for Portugal. There is an economic governance structure that is being put in place finally in Europe, in which we had a monetary union that was not, however, followed by a fiscal one. And that gap in the architecture of the EU is what was, if you like, in my view at least, the most glaring problem that was revealed in 2008. Greece,
there was no political unity.
Well, there was no political and no fiscal unity.
Right.
There was a monetary one.
Right.
And, you know, whereas Greece is in the center of the storm because of some truly terrible governing decisions it made and the huge explosive combination of debt and deficit that it faced, in fact, it is not the center of the problem. It has been revealed to be a European one, the debt problem in general. And what I've always been saying is that I'm glad we have this deal now because scapegoating Greece was never the answer. Now we can move beyond that and like I said, put the European house in order. I think Europe needs it. The part of the markets that want stability need it, and the United States needs it.
In the global economy, obviously.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
of course, of course. Well, the Chinese are talking about investing in this European fund. So, I mean, that just goes to show how interrelated we are.
Now, will all the banks participate in this?
All the banks will be asked to participate, so negotiations are beginning now.
So that means they take the 50%, they take their debt, the bonds are 50% less?
That is correct. And this is, we have 2 months to get this done, to talk to the banks. We had began this discussion a couple of months ago when the initial deal was with 25 or 21% cut. Now it's 50%. But the banks agreed last night, 2 nights ago in Europe, through their head, that this deal was a good deal for everyone, so it's a voluntary deal. And I underline this because that's very, very important. It's important in the way that it was structured, and it's important in the way that it will be perceived in the markets. People discussed, they had tough discussions, difficult ones, but they all agreed. No one was coerced in this.
Is there some devil in the detail here?
Oh, I guess you could say there always is, or could be. But for me, the important thing here is to look at the psychology as opposed to the detail. And by this I mean, we all know that markets at the end of the day are psychologies. This is not an exact science. Right. This is an exceptionally good deal if you were to look at its fundamentals. In other words, if we take it as such, if we accept the market's reaction during the first day and we move forward in applying it, I think that all these devils in all these details will be cast aside by the practical application. On the other hand, if you have the naysayers jump in and all those who have invested billions and billions of dollars and euros in seeing the euro fail and Greece fail and Europe fail, and you allow that part of the markets to hijack the debate, then it's going to be unfortunate. But I think that this time European leaders and Europe is ready. In other words, we know now what the problems were and what we did in the past. We know now what the black holes in architecture was. What do we know now about the problems in the past? We were too many doctors around a patient's bed debating publicly what the right medicine to give the patient was. And the impression we gave for a number of months to the markets is that we had no idea what we were talking about. What happened now is that all these different recipes were debated extensively, were debated in the long hours, and everyone came out with a compromise that is not the lowest common denominator, but it is, it's not the silver bullet either, but it is an absolutely realistic plan to move Europe ahead. So in other words, what I would say is don't listen to what I said, look at what I've done. Look at the fact that I've dropped the deficit by 6 percentage points in 1 year. No other European country, no other democracy, to the best of my knowledge, has achieved this. I've dropped the primary deficit, which was huge in Greece, from 24 billion euros to only 2 billion euros in only 2 years. That's because I cut salaries, I cut pensions. There were many tough, unfair, I would even say, measures that were taken, but also a number of deep structural changes that Greece needed for decades. And we knew them, and the Greek people demanded them. They didn't want inefficient public sector that didn't work. They didn't want the most expensive health care system that wasn't delivering what it should. So these changes, when you apply them, hurt people. They hurt doctors, they hurt lawyers, they hurt others, so they're not popular. But the fact is that we all understand we have to make them, and now Europe understands that as we're cutting, we also need to grow. And these measures give us the chance, the breathing space, to see both the competitive advantages of Greece flourish through the structural changes we're making, but also new money for growth. This is a sine qua non, to use a European expression.
Sometimes the argument is made, austerity builds confidence, and therefore confidence builds growth.
You cannot get out without structural changes, in Greece in particular. But those changes bring recessions and the cuts. It's inevitable. So will a restructuring of the labor market eventually make it more competitive? Yes, sure, it will. But the eventually is the whole point and problem. The markets don't care about eventually. They want to see the effect immediately, tomorrow. At least that's our experience up to now. And so when I say that we've got the breathing space, this is not just, a figure of speech. This is critical to get the support of Greece away from the markets for the 3 years it needs for all these changes to be effective. But, and here's a big but, if we are going to be competitive as Europeans, as Greeks, as Americans, in a globalized world, we cannot try to become like some of the countries we are competing with. We have to find our own advantages. Let me put it this way. If you look around the world today, there are countries that don't have labor standards or labor laws to speak of. They don't have environmental protection standards. They feel, that a perfect freedom to violate the environment. In some cases, they're not even democracies. Now, I will submit to you that all these are competitive advantages, short-term ones, but they're there. Now, the question is this the kind of model that we want to emulate? And I would say no. I do not want a competitiveness based on inequality. I want a competitiveness based on quality. And that means that I have to invest in education, I have to invest in research and development, I have to invest in a social structure that supports my people. And that costs money. where do I get this money in the midst of cuts? Because everyone is cutting, as you said, you have to. And that is the big debate that is happening right now in Europe as well. Where do you find the new sources of financing?
This may be the dark side of things, but as you know, much has been made out of the fact that the German culture is different from the Greek culture. That the Germans are savers and the Greeks are spenders and consumers, and that's why you have the problem, and that's why the Germans are reluctant, until Angela Merkel came through here, to do more in the past.
It's obviously more difficult to sell to your people something if you have, let's say, sell to your people to help someone else, if you have termed that someone else as a profligate, terrible person.
Right.
Now, we have been pointing fingers for too long in Europe during this crisis, too afraid after the financial crisis hit, each country of its own people, own voters, own economy, shutting ourselves in our shells. Now, I just don't believe that this was helpful at all. And look at what it did. The markets didn't believe in us because they thought that we couldn't get our act together, and they killed us. Our people didn't believe in us, and they're in the streets, in Greece and in the UK. In Germany, a tremendous amount of Euroscepticism is coming out. So isn't it interesting that both the lender countries and the borrowing countries both had for a while public opinions that were growing against Europe? Now, this is what I said before. Maybe I didn't say it, but maybe I implied it, that we did yesterday. We got out of the rhetoric of punishment and towards a rhetoric of solidarity. To get there, we, the Greeks, had to prove that we understand the mistakes we made, and we are willing to return to the path of responsibility towards our partners. And I think that the sacrifices of the Greek people, the very, very tough ones, up to now and in the next few years, are what got the rest of our partners to focus.
But the people who got there were people who were in political leadership and people who have a financial stake. It wasn't the people, who provide elections success for political leaders.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. If you're saying that people in Greece are on the streets protesting, I would say yes, that's absolutely true.
And why do you think they're protesting?
Well, because no one is happy when their salary is cut or the pension is cut. And we are democracies, thank God, and this is the way it works.
And so political leadership and political skill and political courage is required to make sure, or at least to do the best you can to provide an explanation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this is where, in fact, getting rid of the rhetoric of punishment helps. I mean, people in Greece back in 2009 voted this government into power, the government of George Papandreou. There were no loans at the time. We didn't know, no one knew the extent of the debt and deficit of the country. That was revealed a couple of months later. And the people voted PASOK, my party, in with a huge mandate for change. They said in that mandate that they wanted to cut the civil service, make it more efficient and make it more effective to support the Greek citizens. 150,000 civil servants have left the civil service in the past year and a half and not been replaced. They wanted to get rid of the intransparency and the waste in the health sector in Greece. Today, there are thousands of doctors that cannot simply write a recipe for a medicine, but they have to do it electronically. They wanted those who were tax evading billions of euros, the rich Greeks who were taking the money out in tax havens, to pay. Today, more and more of those people tax evading are being caught and being taken to trial. What I'm saying is...
It's a large percentage, isn't it?
Well, tax evasion is still a huge problem for Greece.
Exactly.
But let me tell you something about that now. We have a task force of our European partners in Greece that we asked for. A task force of experts from different countries in the EU on different issues that we need. Getting a tax collection system that works in our country and making it effective. Getting a health prescription system that is effective. We are in the forefront of changing the country using, as every European country in my view should, the best expertise and the competitive advantage of every other of our partners. This gives me great confidence that in a few years' time, if we are sitting at this table again, I could probably look at you in the eye and say, remember what I told you, that this is not a disaster, that this can actually work, that this is hope, that I can sit here and look at you in the eye and say, see, I was right. I cannot promise you this because there's a long road ahead. But I can promise you that Greece has the determination to make the changes it needs, and I can promise you that now Europe doesn't simply have the ability, but has the political will to make the changes it must.
A couple of things before we leave. Number one, the Arab Spring. You've got Syria where battles continue. You've had Gaddafi killed in Libya and a government trying to form there. You've got Egypt issues that are there as they try to prepare for an election. Tunisia just had an election. Where do you think it is and where do you think it's going?
I think it's probably going Tunisia's way, because Tunisia had an election that was a very successful one, right. A very peaceful one by all accounts, one that didn't bring an absolute majority out, but you see already parties discussing. In Egypt, the election is different. It's going to be in a number of rounds, and it's going to take a number of months to be completed because they have lower house election, Senate election, then they have to create a constitution, pass it by the people, then they have to vote for the president. But I was in Egypt 2 weeks ago, and I was struck by the vibrancy, the hope of the people. That was remarkable. It's not an easy transition. No revolution is. Syria is deeply disappointing and deeply troubling, but also very, very complicated. You have a situation. It's not as if no country is like another. Libya is not Syria,
right?
Which is, and you see, in fact, that kind of awkwardness in the debates of the Security Council,
whether it's religion or the nature of the society,
and all this stuff. But I think that what you need in this transition in all these countries, where you create by definition both political and economic black holes, when you have them, everyone rushes in to fill them. So the question is, who does so? I think that these countries now do not need new hegemons. They want to be treated not for their oil resources, but for their aspiration, as opposed to the predictions of terrible terrorist Muslim revolutions. Their aspirations to be free and to be democratic and to be able to cooperate with the rest of the world. That's where the European Union, in my view, and Greece in particular, have a major role to play. They want the cooperation, they want the investment, they want the democratic support, but they don't want someone coming around trying to be their new leader. And there are some countries in the region that are trying to play that role. I think that's a mistake. I think we have to be very wise with these revolutions and very supportive, but not offensive to them.
Turkey.
Difficult case, difficult country. In the past few months, with its new military movements around Cyprus, questioning by military means the absolute right of Cyprus to drill in its waters, right. A right that the United States government has recognized, Russia, the EU, and everyone else, is indicating that it may not realize how important it is and how much we, certainly Greeks, wanted to be a stability factor in the region.
You want Turkey to be a stability factor?
Absolutely. Turkey and Greece have been, in the past few years, improving their relationships dramatically. We're engaged in exploratory talks with Turkey for the continental shelf in the Aegean. Right. We will continue this.
But do you believe they're being more aggressive and too aggressive in terms of this newfound confidence in themselves and their economy?
Well, certainly.
And the role they want to play in the region?
Look, I certainly think that what I see, or some of the signs I see are troubling, because they're signs that go against international law, like what they're doing in Cyprus.
Okay, beyond that, I mean
the situation with Israel troubles me as well. I think that
they are what?
Well, there's a raising of the decibel level of conflict and confrontation between Turkey and Israel.
Or some say anti-Israel rhetoric.
Well, some may say that, but there is, like I said, the region is already unstable enough, but filled with hope.
But do you believe that it's happening because there is some design that Turkey wants to appeal to the Arab street, or do you believe it's happening because they feel like they have legitimate grievances because of the flotilla incident?
Well, I think that the answer is probably both, but what I am looking at this stage is a bigger picture. I do not want to have a situation where there is more threat and instability around Israel. I don't want to have Turkey in a situation where instead of being able to play a very constructive role that I believe it can in the African world in terms of building democracies that are in Muslim countries, it may end up appearing to want to be a hegemonic power in the region, because I think, as I said before, that this is not what the countries need.
But do you believe that's what they're trending towards, a hegemonic power?
Well,
or the aspiration to be a hegemonic power?
I hope that they have one aspiration still more powerful than anyone else, and that is to become a member of the European Union. I think that Turkey belongs there, and I think that Turkey, in order to get there, has to make the changes that everyone else has to be. You
don't think they met the requirements to be a member of the
European Union? It's not what I think. It's a matter of what many European countries think. No, I don't. I think that the situation of occupying Cyprus, which is a member of the EU, is a problem.
Actually, do you think it's that, or do you think there's some sense that Turkey is not European and therefore doesn't belong?
I think that there's some countries in the EU that, although not saying it openly, may feel that Turkey should not be in the European Union because of religion and other reasons. I think that's unacceptable. I think that the EU is a conglomeration of countries and religions of every stripe, and I think that that is a power. I think that Turkey, if changed, if peaceful with its neighbors, if truly economically prosperous in a way that is based on sound fundamentals and sustainability, could be a very powerful European member. This is not the Turkey of today. I am concerned by the fact that I see a fatigue in Turkey in terms of the reforms it needs to make to get into the EU. I'm concerned by the fact that I see some European countries state almost openly that they don't want Turkey to be a part of the EU. I intend to insist and continue to insist as the Greek foreign minister in convincing the Turks that the direction of hostility and militarization of debates is not the way to go, and of convincing some of my European partners that it is deeply short-sighted to assume that it is best for us to be a Europe without a changed Turkey than a Europe with a changed Turkey. I think that's a long process.
Chinese got involved in this. Were they early players in this conversation having to do with the solution that worked out, knowing that they stood by to play a role?
No, they were not. In other words, you mean in Europe now in this last decision? Right. No. To the best of my knowledge, you always talk to people.
Right.
But they were not, at least as influential as the U.S. was, where Tim Geithner came a couple of times to Europe, participated in meetings and all that. But it's an interconnected world. The Chinese are exporting this stuff largely, hugely to Europe. When they see
a huge market for them, and they need markets.
A huge one. And when they see the European economies getting into a recession and getting into major cuts, and when they see an instability in the markets, they are concerned about their economy, in the same way that the U.S. is concerned about its. We cannot, for better or for worse, we cannot avoid each other. I never wanted us to. So I'm very pleased that we have to sit and talk.
And does the U.S. continue to have a role in the region?
In Europe?
Well, I'm thinking specifically of more of the Middle East in terms of, because of the Arab Spring, because they're different and shifting levels of...
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the EU has an increased confidence and increased role to play that the Arab Spring countries demand of it. Because of its geographical proximity, it makes sense.
Right.
If you're going to have investments, trade, I mean, that is your region, the Mediterranean. But the U.S. always has been and will continue to be an important player. Now, how the U.S. uses the influence it has and the power it has is not for me to say. But it can be an influence that can break a lot of Gordian knots if it's exercised wisely, and can in fact create even more Gordian knots if it's not. So,
and if it has its own house in order.
if the U.S. does,
yes,
financially,
yes,
you really expect the Greek foreign minister, the Greek one,
to comment on the American economy.
On the American economy. It's not going to happen.
the dysfunction in Washington and all that. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.